She wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. At least, not in the way that fate had arranged it. Corporal Liana Hale had been trained as range support, the kind of soldier who managed comms, logistics, and provided overwatch for the ones out on the line. Her job was crucial, yes, but not glamorous and certainly not the sort that earned medals or headlines. She was the voice in someone's ear reminding them of their distance to target, the one double-checking wind readings, the one ensuring ammo counts were correct and rifles stayed clean. The battlefield saw her as essential background, like the hum of electricity in a room, you only noticed when it stopped. And Liana had made her peace with that. She liked the quiet precision of her work, the knowledge that she made others sharper, safer, more effective. But war has a way of pushing people past their lines, and on that night, in the middle of a shattered city, everything shifted. The city had once been beautiful. At least that's what the old satellite images suggested, rows of shining glass towers, wide plazas, a network of skybridges lit like arteries at night. Now it was a carcass of stone and steel. Smoke clung to every street corner, drifting lazily as though it too had given up. Broken windows glared down like hollow eyes, and every sound carried with eerie clarity, boots scraping rubble, the metallic snap of magazines locking, the echo of a distant detonation. Liana sat crouched inside what remained of a collapsed financial building, her gear pressed against her chest, eyes fixed on the small laptop screen she used to feed coordinates to the forward marksman. She had been in this role for 18 months straight, and in that time she'd become accustomed to chaos without ever being directly swallowed by it. Tonight, though, she could feel something different in the air, an electricity that raised the fine hairs on her arms. Her team was stretched thin. Command had ordered them to hold a section of the city long enough for evacuation convoys to pass through the southern corridor. It sounded simple on paper, but the enemy was dug in like ticks across the rooftops, and every step the convoy took was dogged by sniper fire and mortar rounds. Liana's job was to help coordinate the defensive teams, make sure their shots counted, and adjust their timing to cover the armored transports. She cycled between voices on her headset, giving corrections, feeding them wind readings she pulled from her sensors, double-checking trajectories. It was meticulous, consuming work, the kind she was built for. But all the while, she felt the ground tremble with the concussions of incoming fire, and her ears picked up the stutter of rifles echoing closer than she liked. Halfway through the night, disaster struck. One of the forward sniper teams went silent after a sudden burst of automatic gunfire tore through their channel. Liana froze, waiting for a recovery signal, but all she got was static. "Team Echo, do you copy?" she whispered, voice steady despite her racing heart. "Nothing." She tried again, louder, her voice straining against the storm outside, but still nothing came back. Her stomach clenched. That was their best pair, the ones covering the western overpass, the most vulnerable spot in the entire corridor. If it went unguarded, the convoy would be sitting ducks. She could have reported it up the chain, asked for reinforcements, but she knew the reality. Reinforcements weren't coming. Every unit was stretched razor-thin. If she hesitated, if she wasted even 10 minutes waiting for orders, the convoy would be shredded in its bottleneck. And that was when the thought came, not as a decision, but as a quiet inevitability, the kind of realization that seemed like it had been waiting for her all along. She looked at the rifle leaning against the wall. It wasn't hers, she wasn't rated for field precision. But she had trained enough to know how it worked. She had spent months watching the others, learning their adjustments, listening to their rhythms. She had been their support, their shadow. She knew what they knew, even if no one else had noticed. Her pulse quickened as she crawled toward the weapon, the weight of her choice pressing against her chest like armor too heavy to bear. She picked it up, fingers wrapping around the grip with an odd familiarity. The metal was cool, smooth, alive in her hands. She adjusted the scope, checked the chamber, and then lifted it to her shoulder. For a moment, the world outside receded, as though the ruined city had been swallowed whole. All that remained was her, the rifle, and the empty overpass glowing under a pale wash of moonlight. Somewhere out there, hidden behind broken steel and jagged glass, enemy snipers waited. She exhaled slowly, her eyes narrowing. She had never been more terrified, and yet, beneath the fear, there was something else, a sharp, cutting clarity. "Range support, my ass," she muttered under her breath, positioning herself against the crumbled edge of the wall. Through the scope, the wreckage of the city sharpened into focus. Shadows lengthened, movements became readable, and she could almost feel the breath of her unseen adversaries. She wasn't meant to be the one behind the trigger, but tonight there was no one else. And deep down, some quiet part of her had always known she was capable of more. One shot, she thought, just one. That's all it would take to keep the convoy alive. That's all it would take to prove she was more than just a voice in someone's ear. And in that moment, Liana Hale, the overlooked support officer, began to rewrite her own story. Her finger hovered near the trigger, the ridges of the metal pressing faintly against her skin. Breathing was the first challenge. Her chest wanted to heave with panic, but she forced herself to draw in air slowly, hold it, and let it leave her in a steady stream. The city seemed to hush with her, the chaotic bursts of distant gunfire muffling into something muted, far away. She had listened to snipers breathe like this countless times, the quiet ritual before precision. She was not them, but she had learned enough. Now that knowledge was all she had. The overpass loomed large in her scope, a skeletal bridge of twisted beams and concrete slabs. She swept her eye across it, searching for movement, anything out of place. At first all she saw was ruin. Then a flicker, just a faint glint, a reflection where there should have been none. Her stomach tightened. A scope catching the moonlight. The realization landed with sharp urgency. If she saw them, then they had likely seen her too. Her nerves screamed at her to duck, to stay hidden, to call for backup, but backup wasn't coming. Not in time. If that enemy sniper was lining up on her position, the convoy wouldn't have more than minutes before the overpass became a kill zone. Liana pressed her cheek against the rifle stock and steadied her aim. The crosshairs floated, uncooperative, with every tremor of her body. She adjusted, clenched her jaw, exhaled again. The world funneled down into 2 points of existence, her eye and the target. For the first time, she felt the strange intimacy of pulling another life into the circle of her scope. She thought of the voices of her team, the ones she'd guided and saved, now silent because she hadn't been fast enough. She thought of the convoy drivers, ordinary men and women sitting behind armor, waiting on her unseen decision. The choice wasn't about her anymore. She squeezed. The rifle bucked into her shoulder with a brutal kick, the sound tearing through the ruins like a thunderclap. Smoke spat from the barrel, but Liana's eyes never left the scope. She saw the figure jerk, the faint flash of the enemy scope vanish, then the body crumple sideways into the shadows. For a second she was numb, her mind blank from the weight of what she'd done. Then the rush hit, hot and overwhelming, a flood of adrenaline that made her hands tremble against the rifle. She had fired. Not in a simulation, not at a range, but here, in the heart of battle, and she had hit. She had actually hit. But there was no time to dwell. The overpass was not silent. As though her shot had ripped a curtain away, other figures stirred across the ruin. 2 more shadows shifted along the skeletal beams, sliding into positions of their own. Her stomach dropped. It wasn't just one sniper, it was a nest. She clicked her comms, her voice low but urgent. "This is Hale, I've got at least 2 tangos moving across the west overpass. 1 confirmed down. I need cover fire." Static replied at first, then a tired voice crackled through. "Hale? You're not rated for active shots. I don't have time for paperwork," she snapped, surprising even herself with the authority in her tone. "They'll tear the convoy apart if we don't act. Get your men to pin them down. I'll take the shot." There was a pause, the kind of pause heavy with disbelief, but then a grudging acknowledgement. "Copy that. You're on your own out there." She adjusted her scope again, sweat trickling down the back of her neck despite the cold night air. The second target crawled along a broken girder, steady, deliberate. Whoever they were, they moved like they had done this countless times, calm even under fire. Liana tracked them carefully, her crosshairs hovering, but she hesitated. The voice of doubt, sharp and insidious, cut into her mind. "You got lucky once. What if you miss now? What if you give away your position?" Her hands trembled again, the scope shaking. Then, faintly, another voice rose inside her memory, one of the veteran snipers she'd supported, laughing after a long-range kill. "It's not luck, Hale. It's math, patience and faith in your own eye. Trust yourself and the shot lands." Her breath steadied again. She lined up, felt the rhythm of her body syncing with the pace of the target. Then she squeezed. The shot cracked through the silence, and the target slumped forward, arms flailing as they toppled into the abyss of the overpass. She had 2. A part of her was stunned, the way a student might feel after passing an impossible exam. But the night wasn't done. The third figure had seen the flash of her shot and ducked low, vanishing behind a slab of concrete. Liana's pulse thundered in her ears. She had revealed herself. She couldn't see them now, but she knew they were repositioning, and she had only seconds before they took her head off her shoulders. She rolled to the side, pressing against rubble as a bullet snapped past, biting into the wall she'd just occupied. Dust burst into the air, filling her lungs with grit. She coughed, dragging herself lower, rifle clutched tight. Another round cracked, this one closer. They were zeroing in. Her only chance was to move faster than they expected. She sprinted a few feet across the broken floor, dove behind the remains of an office desk, and yanked the rifle up again. Through the rising dust, she spotted it, a sliver of shadow, the faint outline of a helmet peeking above cover. She didn't think. She fired. The recoil jolted her spine and the shadow vanished. She blinked through her scope, heart hammering, until she saw it, the limp arm dangling from behind the slab. Silence followed. The nest was cleared. For a moment she just sat there, her chest rising and falling like she'd run miles. Sweat and dust streaked her face, her hands trembled violently, but her eyes burned with a clarity she had never known. She wasn't background noise anymore, not just range support. She had stood in the breach and her shots had made the difference. Her comms crackled, voices swarming with disbelief and excitement. Overpass is clear. Repeat, overpass is clear. Hale, did you really? She closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the rubble, and let herself smile faintly. One shot had started it. 3 had defined it. And though she knew this was far from over, she also knew something deep had shifted inside her. She would never see herself the same way again. The convoy rolled through the corridor with an almost surreal calm, engines rumbling low, the occasional squeak of armored treads cutting through the smoky night. 4 hours, those transports had been one breath away from ambush, one bullet away from catastrophe. Now, because of 3 carefully placed shots, they made it through intact. Liana watched them go from her shattered vantage point, her rifle balanced across her knees. Relief washed over her like a wave, and yet underneath it was a deeper current, something heavier, sharper. She had just crossed a line she could never uncross. She was no longer just a support specialist. She had become the shot that had tipped the balance, and in war, such actions never went unnoticed. Her headset crackled again. This time, it wasn't the ragged voices of the squad she'd helped save. It was command. Corporal Hale. Report. The voice was clipped, precise, the kind of tone that demanded obedience. Her throat went dry. She pressed the comm, this is Hale. Western overpass secure. 3 hostiles neutralized. Convoy cleared the corridor. A pause followed. Static hissed between them, stretching longer than it should have. Then the voice came again. Neutralized? By who? She hesitated. The truth was simple, but speaking it aloud made her chest tighten. By me, sir. Echo team went silent. I picked up their rifle. Another pause. She imagined the command tent miles away, officers staring at each other, trying to decide if she was reckless or extraordinary. Stay in position, Hale. Extraction team inbound. Do not engage further targets without authorization. The channel clicked dead. She let out a long breath and leaned back against the rubble, staring up at the moonlight filtering through the broken roof. She knew what was coming. Questions. Interrogations. Maybe even reprimands. She had acted outside of her assignment, outside of the rules. Soldiers didn't just pick up rifles and start killing targets on their own initiative, no matter the circumstance. But she also knew something command couldn't ignore. She had saved lives tonight. The convoy had made it because of her. That truth would ripple, and ripples had a way of turning into waves. The extraction team arrived 20 minutes later, a squad of grim-faced infantry pushing through the debris with their rifles up. Their sergeant spotted her, gave a quick hand signal, and 2 of them flanked her position. Liana set the rifle down gently, raising her hands. Easy, she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. I'm on your side. They weren't here to arrest her, at least not yet. They were here to escort her back. She fell in step with them, her boots crunching glass and ash. No one spoke on the walk back to the armored carrier, but she felt their eyes on her, weighing her like a puzzle they hadn't been given enough pieces to solve. Back at the forward operating base, the night was alive with chaos. Radios buzzing, medics rushing stretchered soldiers into tents. Officers hunched over maps glowing under dim lights. The war never stopped moving. But when Liana stepped off the carrier, she felt the shift. Heads turned. Whispers passed. News traveled fast out here. By the time she was ushered into the command tent, she knew half the camp had already heard that the support girl had taken out 3 snipers on her own. Inside, the air was thick with heat and tension. Major Rowan, a hard-edged man with a voice like gravel, sat at the head of the table. His eyes fixed on her like twin searchlights. Corporal Hale. Sit. She obeyed, spine straight, hands resting on her thighs. The major tapped a pen against the table, the sound sharp in the silence. You abandoned your assigned station tonight. His words weren't a question but a blade. She met his gaze. I adapted, sir. Echo team was down. The overpass was undefended. If I hadn't taken the shot, the convoy would have been slaughtered. A murmur ran through the officers at the table, some frowning, some nodding. Rowan raised a hand for silence. You're not trained for that work, Hale? That's the problem. Her jaw tightened. I've been supporting our marksmen for 18 months. I know the math, the wind, the angles. I know the process as well as they do. And I proved tonight I can execute it. Her voice grew harder, bolder, as though the shots themselves had burned away the last of her hesitation. With respect, sir, I didn't break protocol. I saved lives. Rowan's stare lingered on her, searching, dissecting. Then, finally, the pen stilled. You saved lives, he echoed, his tone softer but unreadable. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. Or you got lucky. That's what we need to determine. He stood abruptly, the conversation over in his eyes. You'll be reassigned until further notice. Report to Specialist Danner tomorrow morning. He'll evaluate your potential. With that, he dismissed her and she was escorted out, the weight of every pair of eyes in the tent still heavy on her back. Outside, the camp pulsed with energy, but for Liana, the world had gone oddly still. She found a quiet corner near the motor pool, sat down on a crate and buried her face in her hands. Exhaustion slammed into her, heavier than her gear, heavier than the rifle had felt. She had killed tonight. 3 times. Her fingers still remembered the trigger's bite, her shoulders still ached from recoil. And though she knew those men had been enemies, though she knew she had saved her own people, the finality of it sank deep into her bones. She had crossed from support into combat and there was no way back. Her stomach twisted, guilt and pride wrestling inside her, but beneath it all was a seed of something else. Not arrogance, not even confidence, something sharper. Purpose. The night wore on, the base alive with motion, but Liana sat there in the shadows, replaying every shot in her mind. Each one had been a risk, each one had been a leap, and yet each had landed true. Luck, Rowan had said. She wasn't so sure. She remembered the clarity that had filled her when she lined up the targets, the way the noise of war had fallen silent until only the math remained. That wasn't luck. That was something deeper, something that had always been inside her, waiting. And as dawn began to break over the ruined city, Corporal Liana Hale realized that one night had rewritten everything, not just how command saw her, but how she saw herself. Morning arrived not with the soft promise of peace but with the grinding churn of engines and the clipped bark of orders. The base was already alive when Liana pulled herself from her cot, fatigue clinging to her muscles like lead. She hadn't slept much, images of last night's shots replayed behind her eyes every time they closed, each one burned in with merciless clarity. But she forced herself upright, pulled on her fatigues, and made her way to the training grounds. She knew today wasn't just another drill. It was judgment. Specialist Danner was waiting for her when she arrived. She had heard his name whispered through the ranks before, half with respect, half with wariness. He was a precision instructor, the man responsible for shaping snipers into something more than soldiers. Broad-shouldered, lean, with a perpetual squint as though he was always looking down the barrel of a rifle. He carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent a lifetime with death just a breath away. When he saw her approach, he didn't offer a handshake or a greeting. He simply gestured to the long row of rifles laid out across the table. "So you're Hale," he said finally, his voice low, gravelly. "The support tech who thinks she can shoot." His words weren't hostile, but they carried a sharp edge, a challenge disguised as indifference. Liana squared her shoulders. "I don't think I can shoot, sir." "I know I can. I proved it last night." A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "One good night doesn't make you a marksman. Luck can carry anyone once. My job is to see if there's anything behind that luck, or if you're just another story soldiers tell to pass the time." He motioned for her to pick up a rifle. It was heavier than the one she had fired in the ruins, finely tuned and spotless, the kind of weapon that felt like an extension of thought itself. Danner stood behind her as she set up at the firing line, his arms crossed. "Targets are at 600 meters. Crosswinds variable, light but shifting. You'll have 10 shots. Don't miss more than 2. His instructions were simple, but his tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Liana lowered herself into position, the rifle cradled against her shoulder, her eye pressed to the scope. The targets appeared small, almost laughably so, white silhouettes set against a dull hill of earth. But distance had a way of shrinking confidence. Her heart hammered in her chest. She took a breath, reminded herself of the rhythm she had learned from the others, the cadence that had guided her last night. Inhale, steady, exhale. Her first shot cracked through the air. A faint puff of dust blossomed just left of the target. Miss. Danner didn't say a word, but she could feel his eyes on her like a weight. She forced the nerves down, adjusted for the crosswind, and fired again. This time the shot rang true. The target jolted as the round slammed into its center. Her stomach tightened, a flash of relief sparking in her veins. The next shot landed close to the bullseye, and the one after that even closer. One by one, her rounds found their marks, until she was no longer conscious of Danner behind her or the base around her. There was only her, the rifle, and the math of the world distilled into aim and breath. By the time the last shot cracked, she had scored 8 out of 10. She lifted her head, breath ragged, sweat beading across her forehead. Danner stepped forward, his eyes scanning the distant hill before shifting back to her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then finally he grunted, "Not bad. Not luck either." He crouched down beside her, tapping the rifle stock. "You've got something. I don't know if it's raw instinct or just too many nights watching the rest of us work, but you see the math. That's rare." His tone had softened, but only slightly. "Still, instinct without discipline is just another way to get yourself killed. If you want to do this, really do this, you'll train until you bleed for it." Liana met his gaze, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still buzzing in her veins. "Then I'll train." For the next hours, Danner pushed her harder than she had ever been pushed. Precision shooting wasn't just about the trigger, it was about stillness, control, patience. He made her lie prone in the dirt for half an hour without firing, waiting for the wind to shift before she was allowed a single round. He barked at her when she flinched, corrected her grip with sharp tugs of his hand, drilled her on reading terrain, light, even the way her own heartbeat could sabotage her aim. By the time the sun was high, her muscles ached, her hands were raw, and her uniform was soaked through with sweat. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, she felt something else blooming: possibility. When Danner finally called a halt, she collapsed onto her back, staring up at the endless blue sky. He loomed over her, squinting, his arms still folded. "You've got the seed of it," he said. "But seeds don't grow without fire. This isn't glory hail. It's patience, sacrifice, and the certainty that one mistake can end everything. You sure you want that weight?" She closed her eyes, remembering the convoy rolling safely through, the look of shadows falling under her shots. She opened them again and answered with quiet certainty. "Yes, sir. I want it." Danner studied her for another long beat, then finally extended a hand. She grasped it, and he pulled her to her feet with surprising strength. "Then you start tomorrow," he said simply. "We'll see if you're ready to carry more than just numbers on a screen." And as he turned and walked away, leaving her standing breathless and aching on the firing line, Liana realized that her journey had only just begun. Last night had proven she could act in desperation. Today had proven she had the potential. But tomorrow would decide who she truly was becoming. The days that followed bled together in a rhythm of exhaustion and grit. Dawn to dusk, Danner drove her mercilessly. He had no interest in praise or comfort, only precision. Every morning began the same: a long run through the perimeter with a full pack, followed by endless hours prone on the line, her cheek pressed into the rifle stock until her neck stiffened and her shoulders screamed. She was drilled in more than just shooting. He made her disassemble and reassemble rifles blindfolded until her fingers moved with instinct. He forced her to sit in silence, watching dust drift in the wind, until she could predict the shifts of the air without even looking at her instruments. It was maddening, exhausting, and unrelenting. Yet, with each day she began to feel her body and mind sharpening, tuning themselves to a frequency she hadn't known existed. But not everyone in camp welcomed her progress. Word of her reassignment had spread fast and soldiers talked. Some were curious, even impressed. Others were bitter. It wasn't hard to understand why. She was just support, an outsider suddenly handed an opportunity most had bled years to earn. At the mess hall, conversations would quiet when she walked in. On the training grounds, she caught sidelong glances, some filled with skepticism, others with resentment. Once she overheard 2 sharpshooters muttering under their breath. "Fluke shot. Anyone could have gotten lucky in the chaos. Danner's wasting time on her." The words stung, but she clenched her jaw and carried on. She knew nothing she said could silence them. Only her aim could. Danner seemed aware of the tension but ignored it. If anything, he used it. One afternoon, during a live-fire drill, he paired her with one of the skeptics, a corporal named Jansen who had been with the Sniper Corps for 3 years. Jansen carried himself with easy arrogance, his smirk barely hidden when they sat up side by side. "Hope you don't embarrass yourself," he muttered. Liana didn't reply. She just loaded her rifle, focused on the distant steel targets, and breathed. The drill began, a timed sequence of moving targets at varying ranges. Shots cracked across the line as soldiers fired, dust plumes marking hits and misses. Jansen fired fast, confident, but his rounds were sloppy, hitting but not centered. Liana took her time, lining up, adjusting for wind. Each of her shots landed closer to the bullseye, methodical, steady. When the drill ended, the scoreboards lit up. Jansen's hits were good. Hers were better. The silence that followed was louder than any gunshot. Jansen's jaw tightened, his smugness shattered. Danner walked down the line, his eyes scanning the scores, and when he stopped at hers, he gave the faintest nod. Not bad, Hale. Not bad at all. He moved on without ceremony, but the acknowledgement meant more than any applause. Liana didn't look at Jansen. She didn't need to. The numbers on the board spoke for themselves. Still, victories came at a cost. Each night, her body ached so badly she could barely lower herself onto her cot. Sleep came in fitful bursts, haunted by the faces of the men she had killed, the crack of her shots echoing like ghosts in her head. But alongside the guilt grew a strange kind of peace. She was learning to carry it, to accept that every pull of the trigger bore weight, and that it was her responsibility to make that weight count for something. One evening, after another grueling day, Danner called her aside. He handed her a canteen, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You're improving faster than I expected," he said. "But you need to understand something. Skill isn't enough out here. Anyone can hit a target on the range. Out there," he gestured toward the ruins beyond the base walls, "it's different. The targets shoot back. They move, they think, they adapt. And one mistake doesn't just cost you. It costs the men depending on you." Liana nodded, her throat dry. "I know. Do you?" His gaze was sharp, piercing. "Because the next time you line up a shot, it won't just be about saving a convoy. It'll be about choosing who lives and who dies. And that choice will follow you long after this war ends." He let the words hang in the air before finally turning away. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we see how you handle moving targets under fire." The next day she did. Danner set up a brutal course, simulating battlefield chaos. Alarms blaring, smoke grenades clouding vision, small charges detonating to mimic incoming fire. Liana crawled, sprinted, and fired until her lungs burned and her ears rang. Her shots weren't perfect, but they were consistent. She hit more than she missed. By the end, her uniform was streaked with dirt and sweat, her arms shaking from fatigue, but she was standing. Danner clapped her on the shoulder once, a gesture rare enough to feel like victory. As dusk settled, she sat on the edge of camp, staring out at the skeletal city skyline. The war still raged and she was still only beginning. But she could feel it now, as clear as the rifle stock pressed against her shoulder, the shift inside her. She wasn't just range support anymore, wasn't just a voice feeding numbers to others. She was becoming something else. Something sharper, steadier. And though the path ahead was steep, she knew she couldn't turn back. Not after the night she had pulled the trigger and redefined what precision meant. The test came sooner than anyone expected. 2 weeks into her training, while bruises still mottled her shoulders from recoil and her body ached from endless drills, the base sirens cut through the night with a sharp rising. Well. Soldiers poured from their bunks, scrambling to gear up as the command channel blared urgent orders. An enemy convoy had breached the outer perimeter and was moving fast toward one of the civilian safe zones just beyond the ruins. If they broke through, hundreds of evacuees would be slaughtered before reinforcements could arrive. The only option was a forward strike to delay the enemy long enough for civilians to escape, and Danner had been tasked to lead a sniper team. Liana was still strapping her vest when Danner appeared in the barracks doorway. His expression was grim, his voice clipped. "Hale, you're with me." She froze, staring at him, pulse thundering. This wasn't a drill. This was real. Danner met her gaze with steady intensity. "You've trained. Now we find out if it sticks. Grab your kit." Her hands shook as she slung her rifle over her shoulder, but her legs carried her forward without hesitation. The moment she had been both dreading and craving was here. The transport ride was silent except for the low growl of the engine and the occasional click of rifles being checked and rechecked. 4 snipers made up the team, Danner, Hale, and 2 veterans she barely knew. Their faces were hard, eyes focused on the mission ahead, but she could feel their skepticism. She was still the newcomer, the support girl playing soldier. She tightened her grip on her weapon, determined not to falter. They disembarked on the edge of the ruins, the night air heavy with smoke and the acrid tang of burning fuel. The enemy convoy rumbled in the distance, headlights glowing faintly against the broken skyline. Danner signaled for silence, then led them through the rubble, moving low and quick until they reached a half-collapsed parking structure overlooking the main road. It was the perfect vantage point. From here they could disrupt the enemy column, picking off drivers and gunners to slow their advance. But once they opened fire, it would be a race against time before the enemy zeroed in on their position. Liana settled into her spot, rifle propped against the fractured concrete, scope scanning the road below. She could see the convoy now, armored trucks bristling with mounted guns, infantry riding along the sides. The civilians had maybe 20 minutes before those vehicles reached them. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. This wasn't a still target at 600 meters. This wasn't practice. These were living men, heavily armed, moving fast. And she had seconds to prove she belonged. Danner's voice came low and steady through the comm, "Pick your targets. Drivers first. Make them bleed time. Wait for my mark." The world seemed to shrink again, the noise of war dimming into a tunnel of focus. Through her scope, she found the windshield of the lead vehicle, the faint outline of a driver's silhouette behind the glass. Her crosshairs hovered, trembling with the rhythm of her breath. She forced herself to settle, to fall into the rhythm Danner had drilled into her. Inhale, hold, exhale, squeeze. Mark. Her rifle cracked in unison with the others, muzzle flash lighting the shadows. The windshield of the lead truck spiderwebbed, the driver slumping forward. The vehicle veered violently, slamming into the rubble. Shouts erupted below as enemy soldiers scrambled. More shots rang out, precise, ruthless. 2 gunners dropped from their mounts. Another truck careened into its partner, clogging the narrow road. The convoy ground to a halt in chaos. Adrenaline surged hot through her veins. She cycled her bolt, found another target, squeezed. A gunner toppled backward, his weapon spinning uselessly. She fired again, this time at a soldier attempting to rally the column. He crumpled mid-shout. Every shot felt like lightning through her bones, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. But the enemy adapted fast. Muzzle flashes erupted from the road as return fire peppered their position, rounds sparking against concrete. The veterans shifted, calling targets, keeping the pressure on. Danner's voice cut through the chaos. "Hail, 2 o'clock rooftop flanker." She swung her scope, spotted a figure scaling the remains of a nearby building, rifle glinting in the moonlight. Without thinking, she lined up and fired. The shot caught him mid-climb, his body tumbling from the ledge in a silent arc. "Good," Danner muttered, almost to himself. But there was no time to celebrate. Explosions rocked the street as enemy soldiers hurled grenades to clear their path. Smoke billowed, obscuring visibility. Her eyes strained through the haze, searching for movement. Then she saw it, a heavy gunner setting up a mounted weapon, the kind that could rip their cover apart in seconds. Her stomach clenched. The angle was awkward, the distance long, but she had no choice. She steadied, exhaled, squeezed. The shot pierced through the smoke, catching the gunner in the throat before he could fire a single round. The battle blurred into a storm of noise and light. Minutes felt like hours as they fired, shifted, reloaded, fired again. Finally the enemy broke. What remained of the convoy peeled back, engines roaring as they retreated into the night, leaving wreckage and bodies scattered across the road. The safe zone was spared. Silence followed, broken only by the ringing in her ears and the rasp of her own breath. Her arms shook, her cheek was raw from the rifle stock, but she was alive, and so were the civilians. Danner crawled to her side, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He studied her for a moment, then gave a single nod. "You held." 3 words, but they carried the weight of a medal. As the team regrouped and prepared to exfil, Liana sat back against the concrete, chest heaving, eyes staring at the battlefield below. She had fired her first shots in desperation weeks ago. Tonight she had fired with purpose, training, and control. She wasn't just range support anymore. She was part of the line, part of the weight that decided who survived. And though the war stretched endlessly ahead, one truth settled in her heart as solid as the rifle in her hands. She had earned her place. The return to base was nothing like the tense silence of deployment. Soldiers gathered as the sniper team marched back through the gates, some cheering, others clapping shoulders. News had already spread. Civilians had been saved, the convoy halted, and the enemy forced into retreat. For a force constantly battered by grim reports, the victory was a spark of hope. Liana found herself swept into the center of attention, hands reaching out to shake hers, voices praising her shot on the heavy gunner. For the first time, her name wasn't spoken with doubt. It carried weight. But recognition, she quickly realized, was a double-edged blade. Not everyone celebrated her rise. In the mess hall later that night she caught the whispers, snatches of bitter laughter, muttered accusations of favoritism. Teacher's pet, one voice sneered. Danner's project. Another scoffed, one mission and now she thinks she's a hero. Liana kept her eyes down, pretending not to hear, but every word lodged like a thorn beneath her skin. The truth was harsher. She didn't think she was a hero. She had fired shots that ended lives. She could still see the convoy road littered with bodies, could still hear the dull thud of her bullet hitting the climber Danner had warned her about. Even in victory, her dreams were haunted by falling silhouettes. But she also knew she couldn't afford to falter. Doubt was a luxury and weakness a death sentence,